Is this thing on? Welcome back to Movies TV Mad. I'm Mick, your host with the most. Just ask your girlfriends and your wives. I'm a very balanced person. I've always tried to make this platform a very balanced platform. I have defended Joker Folie en Deux. I've said it's a very artistic, cultured movie. I have said just because I've enjoyed it doesn't mean that you haven't got the right to say that you hate it. There was always this snobbery when it came out that this film was going to have a musical element to it. So today we're going to talk about from Joker 2 to Superman. There's some people that believe that Joker Folie en Deux has damaged the DC platform, the DC name. I don't believe that's the case, but James Gunn has a lot of fixing to do. Because James Gunn hasn't actually broken anything at DC. I believe the stuff he's done for DC thus far, the Suicide Squad and Peacemaker have been very good pieces of work that I've enjoyed. Not the best things ever, but they were really, really great. Peacemaker was successful on HBO Max, as it was called at the time. It's now Max. The Suicide Squad was a flop during the pandemic and was day and date. Again, we have to be balanced about these conversations, but even though I've defended Joker Folie en Deux, we have to look at the other side of it. And I have to put myself in the place of David Zaslav. When this film was being discussed, for me, I would have said to Todd Phillips, it must be made with the same budget as the first film. The first Joker 2019, had an 80 to 90 million budget, maybe even a 70 million budget. It was a very cheap film to make. Now, early on in the production, the media was saying that this film cost around 120 million. That has shot up to 200 million. Looking at Joker Folie en Deux, I don't believe for one moment that that film cost 200 million. I don't see how that's even possible. But let's say for a minute that's the budget of the movie. As a CEO of a company, as an intelligent person, as a balanced person, as a business person, that's a terrible error in judgment. Because already once it's announced it's a musical, because nobody wants to see a CBM musical. Let's be clear about that. So a certain section of the audience were already going to be put off. So once it was announced as a musical, this film was never going to make the kind of money the first film did, but it still could have done well. But then you've got the other element of it. You've got the fact that this film shaves against the grain. Again, I stand by the defense of this film. I stand by the fact that I enjoyed a cultured musical, but ultimately not what people wanted. Then you've got Todd Phillips having a movie where Arthur Fleck doesn't want to be the Joker anymore. Well, people are invested in this character because he's the Joker. People are invested in Joker as a DC character. What they don't want is you making a film where the character doesn't want to be Joker anymore. So it's clear from my point of view that Todd Phillips wanted to make his story, his movie. He didn't give a shit about the DC brand at the end of the day. He cared about his vision, about his movie. Yesterday we discussed that Todd Phillips probably doesn't like comic book movies and is resentful, like many people in Hollywood, that they've dominated the genre and they've created variety they've blocked variety in cinema. I get all of that. Todd Phillips was always going to make the movie he wanted to make. But ultimately, once you shave against the grain and the fans feel you're against what they love, you're going to create this kind of agenda. We are in the era of Rotten Tomatoes scores. We are in the era of, cinema scores. I hate the fact that there's this thumbs up, thumbs down kind of concept in entertainment consumption these days. But this is where we are. Ultimately, Deadpool and Wolverine is a nostalgia bait, cameo bait movie, but it gave people what they wanted, and that's why it made money. The reviews were mixed, by the way, but I think the scores on Rotten Tomatoes were fresh, and I think the movie did okay, right? So, but ultimately it's about money. Even though the entertainment industry is an artistic industry, you've also got to balance the books. And I do feel that Lady Gaga was a luxury they couldn't afford. If this film cost 200 million, then we must say a lot of it went to pay Lady Gaga. And as I say, if it did cost 200 million, that's insane. Because David Zaslav and Warner Brothers must have known, must have understood from the moment they announced that this film was a musical, that the money, the profitability wasn't going to be there. He's the one who's been cutting costs left, right and centre. He's the one who wanted to axe the Turner Classic Movie Channel because it wasn't bringing home the bacon. But then he greenlights this movie. He's the one who went to Todd Phillips to run DC Studios before he approached James Gunn. Todd Phillips turned him down, or maybe they had negotiations and he didn't like what was coming out of Phillips's mouth. You know, you can't have someone who doesn't like CBMs running a CBM studio. It doesn't make sense, right? So ultimately, as much as I love Joker Folie and Doigt as a film, you can't be spending, if it's true, and I find it hard to believe that Joker Folie and Doigt cost 200 million just looking at the film, but if it did, it's definitely coming from Lady Gaga's wages, and you certainly can't be doing that. Now, here's another issue where it went wrong for Joker Folie and Doigt. In the marketing, they tried to deny it was a full-on musical. Even Todd Phillips tried to deny it was a full-on musical. If it's me, if I'm the CEO of this company, if I'm Todd Phillips, I'm going to have to be honest. This was the mistake that was made with Batman vs Superman Dawn of Justice within the marketing. They pretended it was a WWF brawl between Batman and Superman for 2.5 hours. That wasn't the movie Zack Snyder made. It wasn't the movie that Chris Terrio wrote. They should never have called it Batman vs Superman. Zack didn't want it called Batman vs Superman. They marketed the movie wrongly. Look at Logan, for example. That's a very dour, nihilistic movie. But they never lied in the marketing what this movie was going to be. It's not an uplifting CBM, because you don't have to always make uplifting CBMs, but they were honest with the audience what the film was going to be. And people with Batman vs Superman within the marketing were lied to. So when they went to see the movie, they were shocked what they saw, because that's not what they expected. So when they went to see Joker Folie and Doigt, there was this triggered response of it being a musical, but I think people were willing to give it a chance. But once critics saw it and said, this is a film that's not for the fans of the first film, it's kind of a middle finger to the fans, because as I say, once you shave against the grain, people are not going to like what you've done and they're going to turn against it. The D-grade cinema score is an emotional reaction from the audience. It's not a D-grade movie. Absolutely not. It's a very well-made movie. The cinematography and the dancing and the singing is great. And there's a lot of commentary in the film about mental illness, as there was in the first film. You know, and what's interesting is the first film purposely triggered people, this time critics and media pundits from California, basically, with alt-left kind of political views. Phillips did that on purpose, but that worked for Phillips. I think he tried a similar thing, but this time he decided to trigger the audience. And I think it's okay to trigger the to trigger the media and critics and pundits. That won't necessarily hurt your movie, but when you target your audience are your bread and butter. And once you annoy your audience, once you shave against the grain against your audience, that's your customer. That's the people you want to get their butts on seats. That is a huge mistake. So I think from Todd Phillips' point of view, he won't care about that. He won't care that the movie has been poorly reviewed, has a crap cinema score, he simply won't care. He made his movie. It's also very, very interesting that they've, suddenly Todd Phillips has said this film has nothing to do with James Gunn. This is a Warner Brothers movie, not a DC Studios movie. James Gunn said the same thing to a fan. James Gunn's very comfortable with stepping away from this movie, but he was very, very proud to say that he and Peter, were part of the production of Penguin. Why wouldn't they? It's something the audience wanted, excited for, and it's turned out so far so good. We'll see what happens by the finale. People's minds can be turned if it's a bait and switch, and I've always suspected ultimately that series will be a bait and switch. We'll wait and see for that. And so I don't necessarily feel that Joker 2 has damaged the DC brand. I think in a lot of ways the DC brand's been damaged many, many times. I think Batman and Robin damaged the DC brand. I think the Green Lantern film, even though there's many elements of that film I really, really like, damaged the DC brand. Justice League damaged the DC brand. The divide and reaction from the Snyderverse damaged the DC brand. I love the Snyderverse. I love Man of Steel, BVS and the Snyder Cut. But all this kind of divisive behaviour has kind of damaged the DC brand. So from talking about Joker Folie and Doigt, and the commentary's there on purpose, right? He's triggered the audience into reacting a certain way. And he's got what he wanted. But once you do that, once you try and prove that the audience are toxic, and at the end of the day, we're the paying customer. Again, I enjoyed Joker 2, but you can't do that. You can't shave against the grain. You can't have a film where Arthur doesn't want to be the Joker. It's not what anyone wants. And I respect artistic integrity in this industry, but it's also a business, as I've said. You've got to balance the books, and today we're having a balanced conversation on the other side of what went wrong with this film. What I've explained thus far is what's gone wrong with this film. So now we have to leave Joker Folie and Doigt behind and hit on James Gunn's DC Studios, James Gunn's DCU. What must James Gunn do to fix the DC brand? Well, you've got to stop dividing audiences. Superman cannot divide audiences. Very excitingly, some guy has admitted that he was showed around the Superman set, Fortress of Solitude and all of that, and he was very excited by his visit. James Gunn has allowed certain people to visit his Superman set. I think James Gunn's done everything he can possibly to bring excitement to DC with Superman, to try and hype up the audience. James is James. James is a new school kind of director. He's not just a director, he's also a PR guru in a way. While he's making a film, he's also posting stuff on social media. And he has a very good relationship with a lot of DC fans, we must say that. So he has a vision. He grew up on comics. He says they're silly and blah, 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 but he's just trying to say, they're silly characters, but we love them. And maybe that's come across in the wrong way. Probably not the best things to say, but it's true, people in tights and spandex. It is a bit silly, but we love them, right? So that's very, very true. But, he's got to make films that are not divisive. I think some of them will take some creative swings. I think Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow, a film I'm really, really looking forward to, is going to take some creative swings because this Supergirl isn't an uplifting, hopeful Supergirl in the beginning of her story, but I think as we get to the end of that story, it will be hopeful and uplifting, and she will learn a lesson from that whole story. So that's a very exciting project. Superman is an exciting project. The Authority is an exciting project. Lanterns, although I'm not happy that Green Lantern's starting, Green Lantern Corps is starting their adventures on a True Detective kind of themed, streaming show. I'm excited for that project. James Gunn, the only way he can fix DC and fix the DC brand is to not do what people like Snyder have done. again, I love Zack, but he did divide audiences. This has got to stop. Todd Phillips purposely divided audiences. This gaslighting has to stop. You have to embrace the audience. You don't necessarily have to give in to every demand from the audience, but you have to unite people. And Superman is now tasked with saving the DC brand. And it's a very interesting position and situation that James Gunn finds himself in. So Superman has become this all-important, encompassing movie that must work. And people are excited. I'm excited. I have some reservations about James. I have some reservations about some of the things that I've seen. But also there's a lot of exciting things that I've seen. I'm thinking, yeah, that's interesting. That could be exciting. Nobody really knows how this is all going to work out. I think there'll be a side of James Gunn that'll be relieved that Joker Folie and Dois hasn't been successful, because if that film's successful, it brings another pressure to him. Because my argument is that maybe people like Todd Phillips and Matt Reeves should be allowed to take these deep, big swings and have these, visionaries making these movies rather than having a bottled universe. But one thing's for sure, that you need people making this stuff who love this stuff. And Matt Reeves loves Batman. He understands Batman. That's why so far so good. The Batman was the last successful DC movie. The first Joker was also a very successful DC movie. But that Joker is only the Joker in name only. He isn't the Joker that we know and love. Still a fantastic movie. Nothing has changed as far as I'm concerned. But they're the last two successful DC movies. I wouldn't call Man of Steel a flop. I wouldn't call BVS a flop. And the Snyder Cut was very successful on HBO Max, as it was called at the time, and did really well with digital sales and physical media. There's no question about that. So I would call the Snyder Cut a success. But ultimately, Snyder's vision wasn't for everyone. Now, what Gunn must do is make a DC Universe franchise that's for as many people as possible. And he understands that. First and foremost, you have to get it right for the nerds, and you have to attract the general audience. You can't, when you see something like Joker Folie and Dois, and you see the reaction to it, whether you like the film or not, whether you think visionaries should be making DC content, whether you think it's a great cultured musical movie with lots of different commentaries in it, including commentary about mental health, it's clear people were never happy about it being a musical and didn't like what the movie was attempting to say. And I think the two things that have made this film a failure, at the end of the day, it is going to be a failure. It's failed in terms of critics, Rotten Tomatoes, the cinema score is the lowest cinema score of all time for a comic book movie, or at least a DC comic book movie. I don't even think a Marvel comic book movie's got a D score before. So, the reaction doesn't lie. It doesn't necessarily mean that Joker Folie and Dois is a bad movie. What it does mean is the audience and critics together have rejected this film. I won't reject this film. I like this film. But as a comic book movie, as any movie, when you're making an individual movie, right, about a character that no one's heard of before, it's fine. If this was a fictional character we'd never heard of before, and Arthur Fleck didn't want to be that character anymore, it's fine. But when you say that a film with the name Joker in the title, and the character doesn't want to be Joker anymore, that's a problem. So James Gunn needs to learn the lessons, not just of Joker Folie and Dois, but the rest of the DCEU as well. I mean, Aquaman's an interesting movie. That made $1 billion. So whatever, I don't know what you say about that film, but I love Aquaman, the first Aquaman. I think it's a fantastic comic book movie. I think it does most of its things, if not all of its things, right. It's ambitious, it's visually stunning, the music, the score is outstanding, and the story's great. And I thought Jason Momoa did great And Amber Heard, whatever you can think of her, whatever we think of her, was a great mirror. You had William Dafoe's Volko, Nicole Kidman as Queen Atlanta, Patrick Wilson as all brilliant castings. So that film it must have worked for a whole lot of the audience, and that's what you need. You do need billion-dollar movies. Not all of the DCU movies will make $1 billion. I think it would be a sensational result if Superman could pull in that kind of money. I don't know. I simply don't know. There's no question about it. James Gunn makes comic book content, live action comic book movies and TV that people enjoy. I enjoyed The Suicide Squad. There's things within it I could say, well, and I've explained about those things before, but all in all, that's a damn good movie. And I think that Peacemaker is the best thing that James has ever done. So he has got this kind of rock star reputation with comic book fans. So he has an advantage there, which didn't pay off with The Suicide Squad, but that was during the pandemic. I think people really enjoyed The Suicide Squad. It is an enjoyable movie. But now we come to Superman. As I say, everything rests on Superman now. And if we look at the other argument, this puts even more pressure on DC Universe now, to perform. DCU must be a consistent brand, whether it's movies, streaming, or gaming, or whatever. It has to be consistent because of the failures of the past, because of the divisiveness of the DCEU, and films like Joker, Folly and Dwa. It must perform, and it must perform consistently. And there's no wiggle room. There's no wiggle room anymore with DC. There's been too many failures, too many divisive movies, and now you have to make movies, that people are going to enjoy. People enjoyed the first Guardians. People were divided over the second Guardians, even though I think that's a really, really good film. And people loved Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. So there's no question Gunn can make CBM content that people love, that puts butts on seats. He hasn't made $1 billion movie yet, but Superman is a great opportunity. Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, which is not written or directed by James, by the way, has a lot of potential. Then you've got something like The Authority, which is a very interesting kind of idea. And that's going to hit cinemas. Then you've got big swings like, the animated puppeteering CGI movie they announced, which is about the two Robins, a dynamic duo, Jason Todd and Dick Grayson. Again, that's interesting and that's ambitious. That's exciting people. A Deathstroke and Bane movie excites people. This is what you want. From its announcement, Joker, Folly and Dwa having a musical element at the very least, even though I tried to defend that, wasn't something that people were embracing. It's like me when I hear them say they want to do a musical Doctor Who episode or a musical episode of my favourite TV show. It's like there's something about musicals that turns us off. And it's interesting because Hollywood, the foundations of Hollywood was musicals. But musicals are not a trend anymore. And you can't make everything a musical. The point that I'm making here is that nobody wants a musical CBN. Simple as that. This proves it. One of the biggest complaints about Joker, Folly and Dwa is that it's a musical. The other stuff doesn't help. The ending doesn't help. And a very clever element of Joker 2 is that Harley Quinn is us. She wants Arthur to remain Joker. And she pretty much says to him, if you're not going to be the Joker, I don't want anything to do with you. And he's talking about us. He's making her us. That's very, very smart. But is it a debate worth having? Is it? If I drink a beer and I don't like it and I complain to the company, am I a problem? Or am I just being a customer who paid for something and isn't getting what I want? There's this criticism of audiences who complain about not getting what they thought they were going to get. But that's consumption. That's what a consumer-based industry is all about. And if you're going to give the audience a different tasting sauce, at least tell them when you're marketing the different tasting sauce. And they didn't do that with Joker Folie et Moi, and they didn't do it with Batman vs Superman, Dawn of Justice. Audiences will be very patient with you and, and be constructive in their criticism if you're honest with them. And I think the lies that this film wasn't an all-out musical in the marketing, because Warner Brothers knew how off-putting that was. But when Todd went up to Zaslav, and I think maybe Todd Phillips decide to do Joker 2 even before Zaslav came in, but it was Zaslav who greenlit Joker Folie et Moi. When Todd said to him, look mate, this is going to have musical elements in, Zaslav should have known enough to say, no, we're not going to make any money here. And if Phillips would have, maybe Zaslav did say that, then Phillips said, no, well, I'm not doing a sequel. But Zaslav wanted a sequel. In reality, even though I enjoyed Joker Folie et Moi, I think what people are saying about, we didn't need a Joker sequel. We didn't. They should have left it at that. But once the movie makes over $1 billion, greed sets in. But they should have understood, once they decided to make it a musical, once they told the audience they were making a musical CBM, that it wasn't going to make anywhere near the money that it did. And I think if it wasn't for the controversial element from the media, the first Joker also wouldn't have made $1 billion, but it's a fantastic movie. Did I say $1 million? Billion? $1 billion, right? Whatever I said. But it's $1 billion, right? As we all know. So that film was the happy accident, if you like, but an outstanding piece of work. I think going forward, most people won't embrace Joker Folie et Moi, but some people are saying it ruins the first Joker. It doesn't. If you love the first Joker, just ignore Joker Folie et Moi. I love a lot of MCU movies. I just ignore the movies I don't fucking like. I don't even accept Phase 4 and 5 as part of anything. Because not really a dead set continuation from the first 3 phases anyway. Because those stories have already been told. And that story finished with an end game. It's like with anything. It's like the new eras of Doctor Who. I haven't enjoyed. I just ignore them. Anything really, you just ignore. Rings of Power is not a continuation of what Peter Jackson did. I mean, it's a prequel, but I ignore it. It's like Disney Star Wars. I ignore it. As far as I'm concerned, there's George's 6 movies and the animated stuff that they did in the early days, like Clone Wars. That's part of the canon as far as I'm concerned. But as far as for everything else, I don't embrace it. It's not canonical in my head. So I don't have to bitch on and on about it. I just don't accept Disney Star Wars as a part of Star Wars. So you can still enjoy the first Joker without, embracing Joker 2. But in the next 2 minutes, I just want to reiterate this, how important DCU is going forward and how it has to be gotten right. And when you're dealing with a character like Superman, it's very important you use certain elements from Superman's legacy. And I think that James having a Fortress of Solitude is a very important thing. We didn't really have a Fortress of Solitude in the Snyderverse. Now you could say, well, Mick, the spaceship, the scout ship was the Fortress of Solitude. I know. And it's great and everything, but the fortress, the traditional Fortress of Solitude is very important. We're getting a Jimmy Olsen. To some people, Jimmy Olsen is a pointless character, but I've never seen him as that. He's your way into the story. He's your everyman, your every boy. This young boy that goes to work at the Daily Planet. If they get him right, that will be very special to the audience as well. And I think James Gunn, whatever you say about him, is very aware that the DC brand needs fixing, that Joker 2 didn't break the DC brand, that the DC brand has been broken in intervals many, many times. I don't believe that Man of Steel or BVS broke the DC brand, but BVS being so divisive didn't help the situation. I don't think anything is irreplaceable, or let me say it another way, irreparable. If the DC brand is broken, and it depends on your opinion on this, James Gunn can certainly fix it.